discussed it other than I tell him what's in the news about it.
And what's his reaction? What does he say?
Go tell him that I need a pardon. Go tell him I deserve a pardon. That's what he said.
That's Diddy's lead defense attorney giving the exclusive to CBS Mornings. And get this, while Diddy faces a possible 20-year sentence, is he still planning a music comeback?
He said, well, he's going to be back in Madison Square Garden.
Doing what?
I guess being on stage. You know, I mean, then I said, I'll be.
The courtroom seemed frozen in time as if the very walls held their breath. Not a single seat sat empty, not one gaze strayed from the judge's bench. Every ear strained for the words that might rewrite fate. No murmurs broke the silence, no whispers dared stir, just a tense, suffocating hush that clung to the room like fog. This was no ordinary day in court.
Full criminal trial, 7 weeks of testimony and a verdict that ended in Sean Diddy Combs' conviction on 2 federal sex crimes charges. Could he be pardoned by the President of the United States? You know, that is a question that came up a lot when we were doing the live streams of the Diddy trial every day on YouTube. I never really considered it as a real possibility, but I'll tell you what, now, based on current reporting, we may have to take this seriously. Oh, and in terms of relief for Diddy, we also have to get into his defense team's new memo that they filed arguing that his conviction should be thrown out, or at the very least, he should get a new trial. We're going to talk about that too. And by the way, let me tell you, we have an amazing guest who I'm going to be bringing on in a little bit, somebody who actually helped secure federal pardons for his clients, including from President Trump, and is an expert in criminal law, has been following this case from the very beginning. I'm going to bring him on in a little bit. But why do I say that we have to take pardons seriously now? Why? Well, TMZ has reported that President Donald Trump's administration has been talking to Diddy's legal team about a potential pardon, a forgiveness for a federal crime. It's enshrined in the Constitution. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1, the president shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. And according to TMZ, his decision to pardon Diddy may be determined based on if Judge Arun Subramanian grants Diddy bail, which, by the way, we dedicated a whole sidebar to the other day. His team just filed a brand new letter with the court asking for him to be released. I broke it down, discussed all those arguments. But TMZ also has reported that the pardon decision could also come down to how Diddy is ultimately sentenced on October 3rd. And remember, he was acquitted of racketeering and sex trafficking, but he was found guilty of the 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, the Mann Act violations, namely transporting his exes, Jane and Cassie Ventura Fine, and men across state lines for the purposes of sex work. Each charge carries up to 10 years in prison, although I'll tell you, in a prior filing, the government was looking at roughly 4 to 5 year prison sentence. Mind you, this is before a pre-sentencing report has been prepared for the court, which does a full background check and analysis of Diddy's life and crimes. Now, the defense would definitely love time served and he gets out, or 21 to 27 months. And remember, at the time of sentencing, he'll have been locked up for a full year, so he'll get credit for that. And the judge has discretion here because there's no mandatory minimum when it comes to these charges. But anyway, as you know, we have been following this Diddy story since it broke, 2 years ago? Pardon. Okay, really? A pardon? Meaning Diddy, let's say he gets 5 years in prison, Trump pardons him, he's free to go? President Trump was asked about this a few months ago before the verdict. This was back in May. And he said, when asked about a pardon for Diddy, I would certainly look at the facts. If I think somebody was mistreated, whether they like me or don't like me, it wouldn't have any impact on me. He used to really like me a lot, but I think when I ran for politics, that relationship busted up from what I read. I don't know, he didn't tell me that, but I'd read some little bit nasty statements in the paper all of a sudden. And Diddy had been photographed with Trump over the years. There was some sort of relationship there. President Trump even called him a good friend on a 2012 episode of his TV show, The Apprentice. The problem is, some comments Diddy made about Trump in recent years as Diddy really entered the political realm. There's a video where he's speaking to radio host Charlemagne saying, if Trump gets elected, I really do believe in my heart there'll be a race war. In another video on Revolt, he says, white men like Trump need to be banished. And by the way, you know who's not letting anyone forget this? Combs' rival 50 Cent. Took to social media recently, wrote, see, Trump don't like S like this, buddy. You run your mouth too much. And Donald doesn't take well to disrespect and doesn't forget who chooses to go against him. While working tirelessly to make America great again, there is no room for distraction. He would consider pardoning anyone who was being mistreated, not Puff Daddy.
This was the moment everything came crashing down one way or another. The only movement came from camera flashes sparking like lightning in the shadows. Then the judge spoke. The silence shattered like glass. When the sentence dropped, it wasn't just a number, it was an earthquake. He sat frozen and you could see the exact second it hit him. This wasn't the outcome he'd rehearsed. This wasn't the clean quiet deal his lawyers had whispered about. This was a gut punch, wild and thinkable. Devastating. For a man who built an empire on being untouchable, his shock was undeniable. For weeks, maybe months, the trial had unfolded like a blockbuster thriller. Crowds swarmed the courthouse each morning. By night, news anchors dissected every blink, every pause. Some were sure his wealth and power would shield him, that his influence would quietly bend justice. Others believed the mountain of charges would bury him. His fortress stood tall, but no one saw this coming. The sentence wasn't soft, it wasn't fair, it was ruthless. The judge never even raised his voice.
Let me tell you, the idea of Trump pardoning Diddy is not getting a ton of love out there. Conservative commentator Megyn Kelly posted on X, Trump should not pardon Diddy. He doesn't deserve it. He's a Trump hater. He's a woman abuser. MAGA is already upset over elites seeming to cover for each other. This would not help. GOP struggling with young female voters, most of whom will hate a Diddy pardon. And then you just had other random accounts like America First. What? He's actually considering this? Diddy is a depraved, abusive, sexual deviant who should be spending the rest of his life in prison. If Trump pardons him, he will get absolutely crushed. Who is advising him lately? It's looking like straight up sabotage at this point. There were other accounts that were not in favor of it, although there was this account. Milo posted on X, Trump has no choice but to pardon Diddy after the government, led by James Comey's daughter Maureen, simply lost interest in Diddy's guilt the moment they secured his tapes incriminating powerful Democrats. The prosecution was a shambles. The trial was a farce. Now, I want to talk about if this is really going to happen, how it would happen. Also, if it really depends on bail and sentencing, then what are we talking about? And I have somebody who not only has been following the Diddy case from the very beginning, not only is a renowned criminal defense attorney, but actually has obtained federal pardons from the president, including from Donald Trump. By the way, for his clients Kodak Black and Lil Wayne, those were maybe the most notable. I'm joined by Bradford Cohen. Bradford, thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jess.
Now, before I even get into the pardon, okay, there was a bit of breaking news before we were going to come on. This is what I want to get your opinion on first. So Combs' defense team filed a memo in support of a motion for judgment of acquittal, or in the alternative, a motion for a new trial. And basically, I know you read through it, but basically the evidence, they would say, is insufficient to sustain that conviction. Their main arguments is really echoing what we've talked about a little bit when it came to the bail analysis, but that his prosecution, his conviction on these Mann Act prostitution charges is so unique. He wasn't profiting off of this business. All consenting adults were involved. The jury didn't find that there was any sex trafficking. They argued this isn't even prostitution per se, it's voyeurism, that the intent wasn't for people to travel for sex for money, but he paid them for their time. Everybody was having a good time. He makes a First Amendment argument that the freak-offs and the hotel nights were performances that were typically videotaped so they could watch them later on. It's just amateur pornography. And then finally makes the argument that he was prejudiced because of all the other evidence that came in to prove RICO or sex trafficking, and would have never came in if he was merely being prosecuted for prostitution, particularly the Intercontinental Hotel footage of him purporting to beat up Cassie Ventura Fine. And he says, at the very least, he needs a new trial. I hand it over to you. You think this is a successful argument?
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know if it's going to be successful in the judgment of acquittal. I think the argument is interesting because everyone agrees he might be the only person in custody right now that has ever been convicted of the Mann Act. The Mann Act, and it gives a nice history of the Mann Act, and a lot of people don't understand what the Mann Act is, but the Mann Act was enacted because of a racist motivation that white women were being recruited by people of color to go across state lines and make money. So actually pimping those women across state lines and making money off of their sexual exploits. Obviously, that's not the case here. It's used so infrequently. It might have been a handful of people were actually charged with the Mann Act. No one in custody currently has ever been convicted of the Mann Act. So it's an interesting argument to say, hey, listen, this Mann Act, the original reason for it was racist. The original way that it was applied was racist. The way it's applied here is incorrect because he was not making any money from.
He didn't perform for the cameras. No Germano flair, just a steady voice walking point by point through cold hard facts, the evidence, the testimony, the repeated patterns that formed a chilling portrait, a man who crossed the line again and gainfully convinced he'd never pay the price. With every word there grew heavier. This wasn't about fame anymore, it was about facing the truth. Diddy's body language spoke volumes. At the start of the trial, he walked in with that same old swagger, head high, eyes sharp, like he knew the ending before the story even began. But as the judge kept speaking, that mask began to slip, his jaw clenched. His eyes flicked to his lawyers, then quickly back. For a second it seemed like he might say something he didn't. When the number commit wasn't just a prison term, it was a reckoning. The judge didn't need to say it out loud, "Your empire ends here." This wasn't the kind of sentence you rehab with a few headlines or a comeback tour. This was different.
Now, this is different. Now, what is the defense arguing? I'm going to go over all this in the new letter. I'm going to give my take at the end about whether or not it's going to be successful and whether or not he will actually be released before sentencing in October. So, the defense begins by arguing that Sean Combs should be released in advance of sentencing, and the court has the power to do this. They have the authority, among other things, because you can clearly show, quote, that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. So, what are those exceptions? What are those reasons? What are those circumstances that are exceptional? They highlight several things that we're going to get into. That the charges he was convicted of, we're going to call them the Mann Act violations. That's what it's called under the law. They're not as severe, they're not as egregious as other convictions in other cases. That the sheer fact that he's locked up at the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, for the past 11 months, that in and of itself is a reason for him to be released. These are all exceptional circumstances, and I'm going to get into all the arguments. But first, they highlight the standard, and they argue that to be released under federal law, you need to show two conditions. First, the district court must find by clear and convincing evidence that the person is not likely to flee or pose a danger to the safety of any other person or the community if released. Second, it must be clearly shown that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. Now, clear and convincing evidence is a lower standard, by the way. It's not like beyond a reasonable doubt. Anyway, basically, you have to show he's not a flight risk, he's not a danger, and you have to show there are particular, exceptional, unique reasons for why detaining Combs is wrong. We're going to start with the exceptional reasons justifying his release. And they begin by trying to define, well, what exactly is exceptional circumstances? What does that mean? And they argue that case law suggests a court has a lot of discretion to determine whether a particular set of circumstances qualifies as exceptions. And they say, look, Sean Combs, his case, so different from other ones. There has never been, according to them, a Mann Act prosecution like this one before. And this is how they lay it out. Quote, there has literally never been a case like this one, where a person and his girlfriend arrange for adult men to have consensual sexual relations with the adult long-term girlfriend as part of a demonstrated swingers lifestyle and has been prosecuted and incarcerated under the Mann Act. Combs and two of his longtime girlfriends had a private, intimate life that is not uncommon today. They're talking about Jane and Cassie Ventura. Quote, it may not have been common on June 25th, 1910, when the Mann Act, or as it was originally called, the White Slave Traffic Act, was passed, but attitudes about sex and morality have come a long way in the last 115 years. It is worth noting that when the Mann Act was passed to protect the morals and decency of America's women were not allowed to vote. As noted below, perhaps due to the troubling background of this statute, whose history is rich with both racism and misogyny, the Department of Justice has limited its application to those people profiting financially from the business of prostitution and not using it to prosecute consensual adults for their own lifestyles. By the way, we covered this on a previous sidebar. The defense made an argument months ago to have these charges thrown out.
This was the kind of number that reshapes a person's entire existence. The courtroom's reaction was instant and raw. Muffled gasps rippled through the crowd. A few people shifted like the sentence had physically knocked the wind out of them. Even those expecting Diddy to be hit hard looked stunned. This wasn't just harsh, it was a message, a shot fired straight at the heart of the industry. No matter how rich, how powerful, how untouchable you seem, the rules still apply. In an instant, legend cracked, the myth of the mogul who could command any space islands, any critic clean from any mess gone. For years, Diddy shaped the narrative, whether through hits, deals, or sheer force of personality. But today that control slipped, and that's what made it chilling. The courtroom isn't a concert stage, it's not a boardroom or a red carpet. Influence doesn't echo here, applause doesn't matter. Only the truth does, and today the judge made one thing crystal clear, no one is above it.
the dynamic in a way that could be risky for us.
Was Christina Courtroom ever potentially going to be called by the defense? We were all shocked why the government never chose to call her, since, I don't know, her name came up almost every single day through almost every witness. Was there a plan by the defense to call her?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to get into specific plans or non-plans, but it was more of an overall decision just not to put anyone on and just to use a few pieces of evidence that hadn't come in.
What do you think about the prosecution's choice not to call her? Because I will tell you, we did lunchtime shows, live shows with our audience. I would say 80% of the questions that we got during 7 weeks of testimony was, why is she not being called and will she be called? Were you surprised the prosecution chose not to call who was supposed to be the main alleged co-conspirator?
I mean, I don't think so. I think that she would have been a double-edged sword for them, and they probably didn't want to take the risk. As you saw during the trial, even a number of the witnesses that they had always planned to call, that they did put in, kind of blew up in their faces or had positive things to say about Sean that maybe they weren't anticipating. And so it would have been pretty risky for them to put Christina Courtroom on the stand, I think.
There was so much being said about your client in that trial, obviously in the media, facing a number of different lawsuits. We also wondered whether or not he, and it's his decision alone, whether he wanted to take the stand and give his story, tell his story, give his version of events. Obviously, there are a ton of risks that come with putting a defendant on the stand, but it would be his choice. Was there a conversation about that?
Well, I mean, I can't get into, attorney-client privilege conversations. Obviously, he thought about it, decided not to. And, as I indicated earlier, we thought the case had gone in really well for us. And so we liked where we were. So that was basically the decision.
Now, the big news, a lot of big news came out after the trial, was the firing of Maureen Comey, the lead prosecutor in this case. Now, there's obviously a political angle to it. There are comments that she has made. But I have to ask, you going head to head against her for so many weeks, months and before that, the firing of her, what did you make of that?
I think it was unfortunate. She's a very well-respected prosecutor. We had good sort of professional relationships with her during the course of the trial. And, I don't really think it had anything to do with the trial, but I can't really say anything beyond that. It just,
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair enough. Let's talk about something we can get into quite a bit. Let's talk bail. Okay, so we did a previous sidebar breaking down the defense's renewed motion for release, several arguments for why Sean Combs should be released on bail pending sentencing, acquitted of the most serious charges. There's no comparable case of someone who is convicted of the Mann Act alone and not engaging in sex trafficking or a prostitution for financial gain, and they would be locked up like this. Talked about the issues plaguing the MDC, how it is dangerous, how he's not a risk of flight, not a danger to the community. But do you think Judge Arun Subramanian is going to be persuaded by your letter, by your motion, because obviously he specifically highlighted after the verdict your client's violence, how the defense asserted.
And the weight in that room, absolutely crushing. Still, if you know Diddy, you know one thing, surrender isn't in his DNA. Even as the gavel slammed and court was dismissed, you could see it. That flicker behind his eyes, the wheels were already turning. Appeals, loopholes, media spin. This wasn't defeat, this was recalibration. But outside the courtroom, the story was already writing itself fast. Reporters bolted for the doors the moment it ended, battling to break the story first. Phones lit up like fire, notifications buzzed nonstop. Within minutes, headlines exploded. Judge drops hammer on Diddy. Icon's downfall sealed in dramatic finale. The world didn't just hear the news, it felt the aftershock. And what came next? Almost louder than the verdict, the music industry, once watching from the shadows, fell into deliberate silence. Artists who once toasted beside Diddy vanished from the conversation. Executives who once inked deals with him, now hiding behind locked doors, but for very different reasons.
Sean Combs had threesomes too. When Jane and Combs watched pornography together, Jane testified that she contacted two different porn stars and invited them to join her and Mr. Combs. Both Miss Ventura and Jane testified that very often they would see the same men over and over again for years. In July of 2024, Jane testified, for instance, that she suggested to Mr. Combs that they call Paul. Jane explained that she told Combs she, quote, missed Paul. When asked why she said that, she responded, because I did. This was a lifestyle, one that both Miss Ventura and Jane chose, one they all, as grown adults, had a right to choose. Like many aspects of sex and intimacy, it was not without its complications, its bouts of jealousy, and at times, its frustrations. But that is a hallmark of any serious romantic relationship, and that is what these were, serious, long-term romantic relationships. By the way, not surprising they're really focusing on this because, again, he was acquitted of sex trafficking. They highlight how the jury didn't find sex trafficking of Jane or Cassie, that it didn't occur. There was no force, fraud, or coercion that was used to induce these women to engage in commercial sex acts. For transportation to engage in prostitution, what he was convicted of, the prosecution didn't have to prove that violence was used or that fraud was used or threats were used. It was just, did you transport these women and men for the purposes of sex work, commercial sex acts? And obviously the jury convicted him of that. And they highlight all the jury found was that there was prostitution, payment of porn stars and escorts. And they highlight that he is a swinger, or under the Mann Act, a John. And they argue he doesn't deserve to be locked up for this. Quote, Sean Combs should not be in jail for this conduct. In fact, he may be the only person currently in a United States jail for being any sort of John, and certainly the only person in jail for hiring adult male escorts for him and his girlfriend when he did not even have sex with the escort himself. Over the last 75 years, the White Slave Traffic Act has been limited to defendants who cause interstate travel for financial gain through the business of prostitution. That Sean Combs remains in jail for being convicted of being a customer of consensual adult sex services makes this case truly exceptional. Not only is prosecuting the users of adult prostitution services inconsistent with the Mann Act, it's inconsistent with the prosecution policies of the district attorneys of Manhattan and the city attorney of Los Angeles, California, two of the three locations where this prostitution allegedly took place. In addition, Mr. Combs is incarcerated while everyone else involved in this identical conduct, his girlfriends, the cowboys, the agency leaders, the porn stars, and others, walk free, as they should. If there was ever a fact pattern that was exceptional under the Mann Act, it is this one. And then they move on to another argument, that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, has usually only charged Mann Act violations when there's financial gain. And they even cite a number of cases in the Southern District of New York, where Combs was prosecuted, that apparently involved defendants that set up a prostitution business for profit. Again, trying to distinguish between Combs' conduct and these cases. He never did any of this for profit, they argued.
The silence wasn't about loyalty, it was about survival. No one wanted their name tangled in this firestorm. The judge's ruling didn't just strike Diddy, it sent shockwaves through everyone connected. To him, the message was unmistakable. The old rules are dead. The rules that let powerful men walk unscathed through tempests? They no longer hold. Is this progress or a rare exception? Time will tell. But right now it feels like a seismic shift. The length of the sentence almost pales beside its symbolism. This stripped away the celebrity shield, making it clear you don't get a different justice. Because you're famous, you get this kind. If the appeals phaelon of entertainment's most untouchable icons, will spend years, maybe decades, in a place where fame means nothing. But here's the flip side, we've seen this before. High-profile cases that seemed sealedly to unravel through backdoor deals or obscure legal loopholes. And if anyone has the money, network, and relentless grit to fight every angle, it's Diddy. His team will challenge every detail, every decision, every witness if they must. Now the big question, will it be enough in today's world?
Trial that Combs was violent. Do you think he's going to have a change of opinion now based upon the legal papers?
Well, I think we certainly hope so. And, as we pointed out in the papers, the unfortunate violence that occurred was mostly a really long time ago, other than the one incident in June that Jane testified to, which was kind of unusual. I mean, they had been together for 3 years. There had been no violence, and she essentially started the fight. I'm not excusing anything, but it was kind of a one-off, and I think the government really hadn't put in any evidence of any recent violence. The Intercontinental video, remember, that was almost 10 years ago. He broke up with Cassie in 2018, and in our reply papers yesterday, we submitted a letter from Gina Hyun, who was one of the alleged victims, a different ex-girlfriend. And I think it was a pretty powerful letter about how Sean has changed, how she's not concerned about violence. She thinks he should be released on bail. So we're hoping that that will persuade the judge, given everything else, particularly, as you noted, like the really, really unusual nature of this particular Mann Act conviction and the fact that he's already been in prison, or jail rather, for like 11 months. This case is a one-off to begin with, but we're not aware of any case like this with a Mann Act conviction where anyone's done that much time to begin with. So.
And prosecutors, I'm imagining, have come back or will come back and say, well, listen, look, after the raids on his property, he engaged, or what they will say, he allegedly engaged in criminal activity and, obviously violence, they say, with Jane. But they say, look, what was in his hotel room when he was picked up in New York. They made allegations of what he was trying to do while he was in the MDC, whether it was using other inmates' phone privileges to have three-way phone calls. That was litigated before trial. What would be your response to say, you make the point that he is a changed person. The violence that was shown during the course of this trial is from years ago, but how would you convince the judge to say, listen, we are being truthful, we are being honest, we are being forefront, that he really is a different human being? Because the judge, again, this was right after the verdict and didn't have an opportunity for a briefing schedule. How can you make the argument that he is different and that he should be trusted?
Well, I mean, I think, the point you mentioned about the arrest, I mean, unfortunately, Sean has struggled with drug addiction for a long time. And I think one of the good things and positive things that has come out of his incarceration is given him an opportunity, to rehabilitate. He's committed to continuing that. He's committed to a long-term program of therapy and helping with the domestic violence problem that he's had in the past. So, at a certain point, you have to just, maybe it is a leap of faith, but you have to just give.
The public's tolerance for special treatment has run dry. Social media ensures every twist gets picked apart, debated, and judged by millions in real time. That kind of pressure forces even the mightiest to pause. For now, the truth is clear. Diddy faces prison time that can't be spun as a mere break from the spotlight. This isn't a pause, it's exile. The man who built his empire on being unstoppable is about to learn what losing control really means. Maybe that's why the moment felt so heavy. This wasn't just the end of a trial. It was the collapse of a story we've been sold for years that some can always wiggle free. The judge's gavel didn't just close the case, it shut down that myth. And as cameras caught Diddy leaving, his face told no story, no tears, no fury. Just a cold and readable mask. But maybe that's the real clue, because if there's one thing he's mastered, it's the long game, and in his mind, this fight isn't finished, not by a long shot.